What if Petunia Dursley actually loved Harry? It's a question I've been thinking a lot about over the last month. So, I rewrote a few of the major scenes that she is in and how they would have been different had Petunia actually cared and loved Harry. Some of these scenes are really short, some of them are longer, and I want to break each of them between all 7 books. So I'll publish different videos every day for the scenes that I rewrote in each book. They're going to feel like quick memories in the pensive, to be honest. But they aren't the longest scenes or even the most detailed. But I know some other channels just talk about the differences it would make, but I really want to actually rewrite some of these scenes. So I hope you enjoy this. And if you do, make sure you subscribe. It's annoying to hear that in every single video on YouTube, but I think you like a lot of the content on this channel if you like Harry Potter. So make sure you like the video, please subscribe, and let me know in the comments what you think. And without further ado, let's get to the first scene of what if Petunia actually loved Harry in The Order of the Phoenix. For the majority of the summer, Harry sat in his room, his mind whirling. The images of Cedric's death, the rise of Voldemort, and the grave reality of the danger surrounding him were almost too much to bear. He could barely think straight, let alone sleep. The grief was so overwhelming that he hardly heard the soft knock at his door. When it opened, there stood Aunt Petunia, her face soft but tired, her eyes showing concern. She hadn't come in uninvited for years, but something about the silence in the house made her step closer. "Harry," she said, her voice tentative but firm. "I've been watching you, and I know you're hurting. It's okay to feel it." Harry looked up, surprised to see her there. He hadn't been able to put the pain into words, but somehow Petunia seemed to understand, perhaps more than anyone else. Her love for him was quiet, unspoken at times, but it was real. She crossed the room and sat beside him, her presence offering a quiet, steady comfort that was exactly what he needed. "Sometimes life throws things at us and we don't understand. Things that don't seem fair," she said softly, her voice growing steadier as she spoke. "But Harry, the pain, it doesn't mean we're weak. It means we loved. And that's something powerful. It's okay to mourn Cedric. He was someone you cared about, and that matters." Harry's throat tightened, and he didn't know how to respond, but Petunia's words were a balm. She continued, "You're very strong, Harry. I've seen it in you since you were little, even when I didn't want to. But strength doesn't mean you have to carry it alone, and it doesn't mean you can't grieve." Scene 2. Aunt Petunia's reaction. As he and Dudley stumbled back into number 4 Privet Drive, both of them shaking from the cold, Petunia's face drained of color. Her eyes widened in horror when she saw the state they were in, and for a split second Harry thought she might collapse. But she didn't. Instead, Petunia's hands flew to her mouth as she took in the sight of her nephew and her son, both of them pale and disoriented. Her lips trembled, but she forced herself to take a steady breath. "Harry," she gasped, her voice trembling, though there was an undeniable urgency in it. "What happened? What on earth?" Her gaze darted to the wand clutched tightly in Harry's hand, and though a part of her still flinched at the idea of him wielding such a thing, her protective instincts kicked in with startling clarity. "Don't put it away," she said sharply, her eyes locking with his. "Keep it out. Don't you dare put it away, not for a second." Aunt Petunia rushed to the first aid kit in their home and began to help both Harry and Dudley overcome what they had just been through. Scene 3. The Trial. The atmosphere at Harry's trial was tense, thick with judgment and whispers. Harry stood in the middle of a large, intimidating courtroom, feeling like the center of attention in a world that seemed more hostile than ever. But as the questioning began, it wasn't Dumbledore who took the floor in Harry's defense. It was Petunia. She stood behind Harry, her posture straighter than he had ever seen it, but her face more determined than he had ever imagined possible. When Cornelius Fudge, the Minister of Magic, began questioning Harry's use of magic outside of school, Petunia couldn't hold back any longer. "This is preposterous," she snapped, her voice loud and clear, carrying across the courtroom. Everyone turned to look at her, their eyes widening in surprise. It was the first time Harry had ever seen his aunt so defiant. Harry was forced into this situation, and let me tell you, if he hadn't done what he did, Dudley would have been a soulless child. Petunia's voice was growing strong now. Steady. You don't understand the threat that's out there. You have no clue what it's like to live with it, to have that kind of terror in your home. Fudge opened his mouth to interrupt, but Petunia didn't give him a chance. You don't get it, do you, Minister? Petunia continued, her gaze now sweeping over the room, scanning the faces of the Wizengamot. You think this is about rules, about regulations, but it's about survival. Harry did what he had to do, and if you had been in his position, you would have done the same. Don't you dare turn this into a smear campaign. The entire room fell silent as Petunia's voice rang out. She looked at each of the wizards and witches in front of her, not backing down. Her eyes landed on Dolores Umbridge, who was sitting with a smug expression on her face. I don't know what sort of mess this is supposed to be, but if it's a circus to smear Harry Potter, you're all going to regret it, Petunia said, her voice cold. If any of you think for 1 second that this is about anything other than a boy trying to protect himself and his family, you're out of your minds. The room was still, save for the whispers among the members of the Wizengamot. Petunia stared down the woman with the toad-like face who had been questioning Harry with such intensity that it felt like the air itself was thick with unspoken challenges. After a long moment, the Wizengamot murmured their verdict, determining that Harry was innocent, and Petunia's stern glare softened, though she was still visibly displeased by the whole ordeal. She crossed her arms and turned back to Harry, giving him a quick, reassuring nod. Scene 4. Petunia meeting Sirius for the first time. The first time Petunia met Sirius Black, she wasn't sure what to expect. Harry had spoken about him a few times, but she had always been cautious, suspicious even, about the people in Harry's life. She had heard about Sirius's past, about the betrayals and the escapes from Azkaban. Still, something felt different about him. They were in the living room at 12 Grimmauld Place when Harry introduced the two of them. Sirius looked at Petunia with a smile that was surprisingly warm, his eyes kind and open. You must be Harry's aunt. He's spoken about you, he said with a sincerity that caught her off guard. Petunia had to admit she wasn't expecting him to be so human. The way he smiled at her, there was no arrogance, no hidden agenda, just the recognition of something real. And when he spoke, his voice was surprisingly gentle. I just want to say thank you, he continued. Thank you for everything you've done for Harry. I know it's not easy. I didn't get the chance to be there for him like I should have. But I'm grateful that you were. Petunia felt a lump rise in her throat. She hadn't expected him to be so open, and it moved her. She swallowed hard, trying to mask her surprise, but her eyes softened. I don't do this for any recognition, she said softly, but Harry, he's a good boy. A good man, really. He's been through things that no one should have to go through, but I'm proud of him, and I've always been proud of him. Sirius nodded. I wish I had known him better. James and Lily would have wanted us to be there for him. They loved him more than anything, and I can see their love in him even now. Petunia's heart ached at the mention of her sister and brother-in-law, and for a moment she and Sirius simply stood there, connected by a shared love they both had for Lily and James. They spoke of old memories, how Lily would laugh at James' antics, how they had all been so young once, and Petunia felt a warmth in her that she hadn't felt in years. I think they'd be proud of him, Petunia said softly. He's grown into someone I could never have imagined, but I'm glad he has people like you around him. People who know what he's been through. Sirius smiled, his eyes full of affection. I'm glad too. Scene 5. Petunia's letter. Harry sat at his desk, staring at the scar on the back of his hand. A deep, lingering feeling of dread washing over him. His thoughts drifted back to the terrifying encounters with Umbridge and her cruelty, but before he could let his mind wander further, he noticed an envelope lying on the table. It was from Aunt Petunia. Opening it, unfolding the letter, her neat, careful penned handwriting appeared on the page. Harry, I've heard terrible things about that woman, Professor Umbridge, and I don't like it one bit. She is a terrible person, Harry, and you need to be on your guard. People like that, who are so willing to wield power in such a cruel and unjust way, are dangerous. dangerous beyond words. You need to stay vigilant. And if you feel like things are getting out of hand and if you're in trouble, tell me. Do not wait. I don't care how much magic is protecting that school. I'll break all of it if it means protecting you. I'm sorry I can't be there in person, but don't forget, I'm watching over you. You're not alone. Take care of yourself, and remember, I trust you to know what's right, but don't ever hesitate to reach out if things get bad. Love, Aunt Petunia. Harry sat back, the letter still in his hands. He hadn't expected this kind of support from his aunt. But there it was, her firm belief in him, her protective words. Petunia's confidence in him, even from afar, felt like a warm shield against the chaos of his world. Scene 6. Petunia at Hogsmeade. She stood there, waiting at the platform, her face tear-streaked, her expression one of raw sorrow. She had been crying for a week straight. Her eyes were red, her heart heavy with loss. But she knew she had to be there for Harry. He needed her now more than ever. When Harry stepped off the train, he looked worn, exhausted, and crushed. The weight of Sirius's death had taken all the light out of him. "Aunt Petunia," he whispered, his voice hoarse. Without a word, Petunia pulled him into an embrace, her arms tight around him as she whispered, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry you had to go through this." She could feel him trembling. She held him even tighter. Her heart broke for him, but she knew she couldn't let go. Not now. After a long moment, Petunia pulled back, her hands cupping Harry's face gently. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of parchment, her fingers trembling slightly as she handed it to him. "This is from Sirius," she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "We wrote back and forth a bit after we had met. And in one of his last letters, he wrote about you." Harry stared at the letter for a moment, then slowly unfolded it. It was written in Sirius's familiar handwriting. He read one line in the middle of the letter. "I could not be prouder of Harry, Petunia. I am so proud of the young man he has become. He is like the son I never had, and I hope he knows that." Harry choked on his words. He would read the rest later. Petunia reached out to squeeze his hand. "You keep this," she said softly. "You keep it, and remember that Sirius loved you. Always."